Having a business mentor is one of the most essential components to ensuring rapid and continual growth of your business, and the numbers bear that very fruit. According to Forbes and the U.S. Small Business Administration, 70% of mentored businesses last longer by a total of 5 years than non-mentored businesses. Furthermore, businesses with mentors see a positive return on their profits and bottom line. Mentored businesses can increase their revenue by as much as 83% as opposed to those without. And lastly, there's an in-demand market for business mentors. 89% of small business owners who don't have a business mentor wish they did. This is all good news and food for thought from my friend Jerry Brazie. He's been a business mentor, an entrepreneur, and a business coach for more than 30 years. He comes from humble beginnings. He's one of 9 kids. He was born into abject poverty and violence. He was stabbed within an inch of his life. However, Brazie is the ultimate testament of resilience and perseverance. The mindset he learned growing up followed him into business. He started his first company with no formal education, no money, or a safety net. And even though the company made millions in their first 4 years of business, he didn't even pay himself. And over the last 25 years, he's built, bought, and sold more than a dozen companies for more than $450 million across a wide array of different industries. He's also been married for more than 3 decades and has 3 kids. He's here today because he says he knows what it's like to let success get in the way of what truly matters. And after decades of the game, he is currently running an 8- and 7-figure company, respectively, and he started a third, known as the Kronos Group, a tight-knit peer group for serious entrepreneurs and business operators who want direct conversations and real accountability. And Brazie joined me this week to talk everything relating to modern and time-tested business strategy, succeeding in entrepreneurship, and what makes his societal experiences unique, which allow him to have success in the arena of business. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about your career in entrepreneurship, my friend. Fred, it's great to see you, and happy Thursday to you, my friend.
Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. So, Jerry, my first question has to do with January being a National Measuring Month. I'm curious, for you, what sort of importance do you place on entrepreneurs having mentors, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
I think that a quick story for my background is I'm sitting here having had a dozen businesses and done hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and I'm sitting here because of mentors. And so I am a huge proponent of finding mentors. I fell into mine. It's not necessary, but it sure makes life easier. I fell into my mentorship in that I had started my first business at 28, and at 30 years old, I had been approached by a Fortune 500, a former Fortune 500 CEO, and he said that he was starting this group, a mastermind group. I had no idea what a mastermind group was, a peer-to-peer group, if you will. And I said, I'm busy, I'm growing this company, I'm working 15-hour days, I don't have the time. And he said, you can't afford not to have the time. And I said, well, it's, I don't know, it's $500 or $600 a month in those days. This is 25 years ago. And he said, and I said, well, I'm not even making any money yet. I'm trying to build this business. And he said, you can't afford not to spend the money. And it was the best advice I ever got, because it put me in a room one day a month where we would all get together. There's 8 or 10 of us, and everybody would get a half an hour to talk about their business. And then there would be feedback going back and forth from people who had been there before you and had the experience. And so in my case, I was 30 years old when I joined, and everybody in the group was in their 50s. And so they had the benefit of all of this experience. And for the first couple of years, I just sat there and listened and didn't say anything and just kind of soaked it all in. And so in that context and attaching myself to those people, I was able to, it's not like I didn't make a bunch of mistakes and have all kinds of problems. I absolutely did, but I can't imagine what the number of problems would have been, and or I probably am not even sitting here had I not had the guidance of the group, specifically because they had been through many of the things that I was about to go through. They were showing me problems in my business I didn't even know I had, things that had happened to them, and they would explain how they dealt with it, and I'd go, well, wait a minute, I have that thing sitting on my shelf. I recognize that. You're telling me that instead of that thing going left, it might go right? And they would say, yeah. And so they give you that advantage to kind of foresee what might happen. So in that context, either a group like that one that I was in, and again, that's my latest company that I've started, the Kronos Group, to do exactly that, or find a mentor, somebody specifically that is doing the thing that you would like to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be doing the thing that they are successful at. It is that they are doing it, and you can learn a ton from finding those people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, as you mentioned, Jerry, you've started grown upwards of 12 or so businesses in the course of your career, and you've made over $450 million in revenue, my friend. So I'm curious to ask you, what do you think is the greatest lesson you've learned in your nearly 3 decades in business, my friend?
I'm going to say that the best lesson I learned is that I'll take that a little from the very beginning. Let's take what I didn't know versus what I know today. And the reality is that the world of business is not at all what we believe it to be. And that forces outside of business, i.e. the things, we get paid to pick something up and you get paid to drop that off. And that is your business. You get paid to create something you pay to create something, and then someone pays you for that thing that you created, and that's the business, right? So business to business, business to consumer, whatever it might be, that is just a piece of a business and a small piece. And I put it this way, I'm a developer. Also, I have multiple businesses, and I develop land and build houses. And about 30% of the price of a house, all in, land, the development of that land, the foundation then for the house, and then the house that you put on top of it, is about 30% government. So I have 30% of the cost of a house here in the States, particularly up in the Northwest, is government. And I think that the thing that I didn't realize when I started, that I realize now, that everyone should realize that is either getting into business or is in business, is that government and regulations and rules play a significant part in whether or not you can find success. By that, I mean you can have the best product. You can have the best marketing. You can sell it at a fantastic price. And the vagaries and the realities of the current government systems that we all have to live under at the state and local and federal level can come in and decimate you and not even notice that they did it through no fault of your own. And so there needs to be more emphasis put on that, and people have a greater understanding of how intrusive the government can be and how it can all disappear in a moment. And we learned this most specifically during COVID. I think that is probably the wake-up call for a lot of people. So if you ask me what have I learned over the last 30 years is to pay closer attention to the downside, and the downside not being that I wasn't able to sell something for a profit, the downside being the impact that governments can have on you without you even knowing it.
Yeah, and Jerry, since you brought it up, how do you think the lessons that we learned during COVID can help entrepreneurs run more efficient businesses, my friend?
How do I think COVID did that?
Yeah, how do you think COVID made entrepreneurs more efficient?
Yeah, I think that for sure, entrepreneurs, we learned to run more efficiently. But here's what it really did: COVID decimated the small business world. The people who did well during COVID were all of the big businesses. They were the ones that were able to maneuver themselves around all of the regulations and all of the madness. Again, regulations and rules and lockdowns, all of those things always inure to the benefit of the super rich, the super wealthy, and to the big corporations. The small businesses, I think we lost something like 30 or 40% of them down here in the States. A tremendous number. I'm happy to be fact checked on that, but I think it was like 30%. And they're never coming back. And so what small businesses learned to do was that they can survive, the ones that did, in an environment that was probably challenging at a level no one will ever have again. And from that, then, if you pay attention to it, if you take the emotion out of it and say, yes, the government did all of these things, and yes, this was of no creation of mine, but here is where I find myself. How do I learn from this? How do I maneuver through this? What could I have done differently to make this not be so oppressive, to make this not be so difficult? And then climbing out of it, what can I do? What can I learn from it so that as I grow, I use those lessons from this very, very difficult period to then make money when times aren't locked down in that difficult period. So I think that a focus is probably what COVID did as much as anything else. It brought a focus to people and their businesses, and that made them look at it in a way that they would not otherwise, which is that you have to survive. And you look at, if somebody puts a gun to your mother's head and says, if you don't get this business to operate the way that it's supposed to, I'm going to pull the trigger, that will incentivize you in a way that you would not otherwise be. COVID made people do that in a way they would not otherwise. Remembering that now as we climb out of it is the critical part.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jerry, I know that you came from humble beginnings and you built your business success after you had a very interesting childhood, my friend, when you came from poverty. You were severely beaten and you almost died, my friend. So talk to me about your own personal resilience and growing up and how that's translated into your business career, my friend.
Yeah, I'll say that my childhood I'm child number 7 of 9. And my parents had 6 kids by the time they were 23 years old. My mother brought home a brand new infant and had a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-old. So 6 kids, 5 years and under. 7 years later, I was born, and I have a little brother and a little sister. So abject poverty, and I got my first job as an 11-year-old. I paid taxes as an 11-year-old, and I've never not paid taxes since. And to your point, I grew up in violence. I've been beaten within an inch of my life multiple times. I've been shot at. I've been stabbed. I lived that life. My little brother and I stole food when we were kids. My brother's 22 months younger than I am. We stole food as children. That was the way that I was brought up. But, at the same time, I say all of the time that I am who I am in spite of where I come from, but also because of where I come from. So it is, both things can be true at the same time. the things that it takes to be an entrepreneur, particularly again, when I was 17 years old, I was living with hookers and heroin addicts in a $25 a week flop house while holding down a full-time job. So I always knew how to work. I always knew how to put in that effort. And regardless of where I came from, the lessons I learned going through that background, I was able to bring forward and turn it into a career. And it helped me immeasurably being an entrepreneur. So the things that happened to me, in spite of that, I became a success because of what it taught me. And because of the things that happened to me, I became a success because of what it taught me. So I look at it both, I do not look at it negatively. I look at it as positively. I had a great childhood relative to a lot of other people in the world. I never lose that perspective. And I choose to take that I survived those hard times as a child to help me survive hard times as an adult when looked at in perspective is not nearly as bad. The worst thing that could happen to you as an adult in a business environment and failure and losing and all of those things does not even begin to compare to what I went through as a child. So in context, it's become a superpower for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jerry, just before I ask you about the Kronos Group, I wanted to also ask you about the role inclusion plays in business. And I'm going to ask the question this way. So I have cerebral palsy, Jerry, and I talk to businesses about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities, because when I graduated college, I wanted to become a sports reporter. And anyone that listens or watches my podcast knows that I went on 10 consecutive job interviews, and I was denied 10 consecutive times because at the time, news directors looked at my disability as a liability, and so I've dedicated my adult life to helping organizations understand the competitive advantage of hiring folks with disabilities. And I'm curious, as someone that's spent more than three decades in business, what sort of competitive advantage do you think folks with disabilities can add to an organizational culture? And then secondarily, how do you think we can change the attitudinal barriers of employers so that they can hire more people with disabilities, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
I think that in any good environment for an entrepreneur, merit-based is always the most important. If you are trying to run a program where someone cannot contribute, then regardless of their background, you're going to struggle at that. If someone can do the job, then they should be able to be brought in and do the job. And I think that finding jobs for people with disabilities is not only something that you should do because you should, but it's also something you should do because it can be profitable. So I'll say that right out the front. That doesn't mean that everybody with disabilities should get a job and that every company should hire people with disabilities. I'm not saying that because I don't believe that. But I think that if you have a job that someone can do and do it well, it can be profitable and you can benefit the person with disabilities and help out that community. So that's how I would answer that. The second part of your question is it's out of our control, and I think it's important for people on the disability side to hear this, is that a lot of what holds companies back from embracing people with disabilities is the government. The government makes it onerous for business owners, i.e. the risk is so high to bring on somebody, particularly here in the U.S., because the environment for lawsuits is as crazy as it is. Anybody can sue anybody for any time. And so if we look at like American with Disabilities Act and we look at what employment looked like for people who qualify under that prior to that act becoming law and post that act becoming law, we see a significant degradation in that employment. And what that is employers coming back and saying, what if I hire this person and this person can't do the job, or this person becomes a liability for me? It makes it almost impossible to get rid of that person, to fire that person, to lay that person off without that person being able to come back on you. And so I think I see a cautiousness in the entrepreneurial environment, in the business environment, as it relates to small businesses, because there is a system in place that stacks the odds against us should the situation not work out.
Well, it also stacks it against the person with a disability. So I think there's a give and take, and I think it's a further discussion for sure, my friend. But I know that your latest group, the Kronos Group, is a business community that allows people that are serious about entrepreneurship and growing their business to have direct conversations that hold them accountable, my friend. So tell me about why you wanted to start the group and the progress it's making, my friend.
Yeah, so like I talked about earlier, where the group that I joined at 30 years old, it was such a huge impact on me. And I have been saying for years that I need to go start a new group. I need to start my own group. Now, my group has been together for 25 years. Now, everybody's in their 70s and 80s. That was in their 50s when I started it, when I was in my 30s. And so the group now gets together about one time a year. And I've been talking for years about I need to start my own group and put that together. And so I decided late last year that I was going to do that. And the name of that company is, like I said, the Kronos Group, Kronos group.org is where you can find us. And it is for entrepreneurs doing 6 and 7 figures, 7 and 8 figures per year in revenue. And the accountability, just like what I said, that group helped me grow my business and to do all those hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And it helped me maneuver through the mistakes I made and to come back from losing fortunes and help build me up when I made fortunes. It was really significant in my growth and in my career that I said, it's time to go start a new one. And so that's what I did. I've never done, this is more of, while it's a for-profit business, it is almost a passion of mine. And that is something that I constantly preach to people, is they should not chase their passions when trying to start a business. I have never, in all of that $450 million in revenue, not a single penny of that money has come from me doing something that I am passionate about. Now, I am passionate about business, and I'm passionate about the game of business. But my true passion lies in feeding my family, making sure my children have a better life than I do, making sure my wife is comfortable and she's taken care of, my parents are taken care of. And so I was able to use my talents to put them to use in businesses that I could sell something to somebody and make a profit doing it, and then take that profit and go do things that I'm passionate about. And so in that context, it helps to be around other entrepreneurs who are doing the same thing, looking at their business careers the same way, and we all help each other through good times and in bad times, through support, but also critical evaluations of each other's businesses to make sure that we are taking out as much of those profits as we can, we're operating as efficiently as we can, and we're also getting along with our families and our friends, and we have a life outside of business. And so the group brings that all together for entrepreneurs that are doing 7 and 8 figures.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jerry, I wanted to get your thoughts on these findings from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that highlighted last year that entrepreneurs who have a strong psychological resilience and a proactive mindset are 129 times more likely to keep their business alive, my friend. So what does that tell you about psychological resilience and the importance it is to successful business? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. That really is a good question. And I think that mindset, resiliency, self-assessment, perspective, these are all superpowers when it comes to being an entrepreneur. Listen, being an entrepreneur, to anybody thinking about doing it, is one of the hardest things that you will ever do, and your chances of failure are significantly high. So you need to know that going into it. To any entrepreneur out there that is just getting started and is struggling, you need to understand that this is reality. The internet and social media has it shows a version of business that I don't understand. I would say that 80 to 90% of everything on the internet that I see by influencers relative to the experiences of a small business is just not accurate. And this whole idea that if you're working more than 4 hours a week and not driving a Lamborghini, you're doing something wrong is just not true. And so there has to be a mindset, because you're trying to do something that is so difficult that it can be overwhelming. I'm going to repitch the group again, because the group that I was in was so important for this. And this is what the Kronos Group is about, which is putting you in the room with people so that you can see that you're not the only one with these problems. Because I'll tell you, Kevin, that I've talked to thousands of entrepreneurs throughout the years, and the one thing that across the board that is always true is they think that they are the only ones with the problems that they are having, and every one of them have the same problems. Because being an entrepreneur is a lonely environment, and because your parents don't understand what's going on, your family doesn't understand the risks and the sacrifices and the stress and the pressure that's on you. The employees certainly don't understand it at all. A lot of times you don't understand it, because we all kind of think we can be entrepreneurs, and we go and we jump. And so being in a room with other people who have the same problems, and to hear that they have the same problems, it's not just a you problem, it's a they problem, helps you, or it's a everyone problem, helps you deal with these things psychologically, because having that mindset and being strong that way is absolutely a critical weapon to trying to become a successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, and Jerry, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on these findings from Medium, which reported that only about 9 to 10% of U.S. small businesses reach about seven figures during the course of their revenue, and solo ventures are joining the ranks of turning $1 million in sales at a more rapid rate. But they also say that keeping that $1 million and turning it into profitability remains a challenge, my friend. And some of the reasons they list for this is a lack of cash flow and a lack of motivation or market demand for their product or service. So what are your thoughts on these findings, and how can we turn more small businesses into 6 or 7 or 8-figure businesses, in your opinion, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
I think that the first thing is to understand that having the average business in the United States somewhere between $450,000 and $650,000 a year. So if you're doing $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year, you're the average size small business in the United States, and that is well done. To build a company that does that, you can make a living. You can make a good living at that if you work hard, you're smart about it, and you perform, you put your operations together, you have sales in place. You're going to make mistakes. It absolutely happens. But that is an accomplishment to just get to that mean average of, let's call it $500,000 a year. So the first thing I tell entrepreneurs is don't look down on yourself because you're not doing $100 million a year, or you're not doing $10 million a year. Understand, if you're doing $500,000 a year, think about this, Kevin. If you're doing $500,000 a year, that means you got complete strangers starting from scratch to pay you over the course of a year $500,000 for some value they perceive you are bringing. That is an event that should be absolutely celebrated, but it's not, because we're always worried about what the next step is. So I want to say that first. But to answer your question directly, if you are at $500,000, it is much easier to go from $500,000 a year to $1 million by several factors easier than it is to go from 0 to 500,000. Just the math alone, right? If you compute going from 0 to 500,000, but in practice, 500 grand to a million is significantly easier than 0 to 500,000 because you start to learn your lessons as you go. You start to gain efficiencies. Maybe in that journey, you start to get beat down enough that you start to open up and listen to people around you who have gone through it before and are willing to help you out. But you start to figure out marketing. That's always a big part of it. At 500 grand to a million, and to get to that point, it's the same number. It's just another digit added to it. There's not much difference between a $500,000 company and $1 million company. But I think that at 500 grand, it lets you put in that baseline, make sure that you got your operations tight, figure out where you have capacity. I always looked at my delivery business. A delivery business has done hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 25 years. I always looked at it and said, how much capacity do I have in it? Am I running at 83%? Okay, I could probably run to 90, 92% without having to add anybody new. So it's just concentrating on where, using the business that I have, can I extract more profit? Can I add more sales without adding as little bit of overhead as possible? People try to, when they get to 500 grand, they get the thing up and running, they're coming up on $1 million, to go and do things that require non-economies of scale, right? So if you're making a pencil, all of a sudden you decide that you're going to go make a bike. Well, the two things aren't the same. They don't sell the same way. The people that buy them aren't the same. The economies aren't the same. And so we tend to want to start to broaden our horizons by going into too many things rather than try to capitalize on that core business that we have and figure out where those economies of scale are and drive it up to that top revenue. But, and I'll finish with this, the revenue is not the ultimate number. It does not even matter. If I'm making 200 grand on 500 grand and to drive to $1 million, I'm still only going to make 200 grand, I'll stay at 500 grand. Look at your bottom line. What kind of cash are you throwing out of the business, and what is that bottom line? Because the degradation of the bottom line as we grow is very easy to do. You can be strategic about it, but you need to make sure that you're being strategic about it, i.e., I need to spend money to build a foundation to get over $1 million. But when I hit $1,200,000, it's all going to be pure profit. Now I'm making 400 grand on $1.2 million as opposed to 200 grand on 500,000, if that makes sense. It needs to be. You need to make sure that you have that plan in place and that you're not growing for growing's sake. And speaking as a man, and this was very important for me, and through my history, I've seen this with men, we tend to like the top number a lot more than we like the bottom number, which is the wrong way to look at a business.
Oh, well, yeah, the numbers always tell the story one way or the other, don't they?
That's right. Yes, sir. That's right.
And, Jerry, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on this from Gallup from last year that reported that between 59 and 62% of American entrepreneurs or adults are motivated to start a business because they want to be their own boss. So I want to ask you about, entrepreneurial enthusiasm, but I also want to ask you about the questions people should ask themselves before they start a business. So you can take that two-part question in any direction you wish, my friend.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, Kevin, I do a lot of podcasts, man. You ask some fantastic questions. You've clearly done a little bit of work, so congratulations to you. That's a fantastic question. Here's the reality. Most people, the vast majority of people, should not be entrepreneurs. I think those statistics and those numbers are what they are because the internet, as I said earlier in the interview, is not reflective of real world entrepreneurial, the real world of an entrepreneur. They show it to be something that it is not. And typically they do it because they're trying to sell you something. They want you to buy their 10-day program. They want you to buy their $35 tutorial. And they're doing that. They're telling you that life can be easier. You can work 4 hours a day and have this hugely successful business. You can live in the south of France while your money is just being made passively and you're not there having to do anything about it. And I think that those numbers are that high because there is a misnomer about freedom and time that comes from being your own boss. And in reality, it is exactly the same. I'll go back to what I said earlier. It is one of the hardest things in the world to do. I am not a proponent of this work in your business, or if you're not working on your business instead of in your business, you're a failure. I'm not a proponent of all I've done. If you can't leave your business, all you've done is buy yourself a job. I'm not a proponent of any of that, because the reality of running a business, in particular a startup, and getting it up off the ground and going is very, very difficult. It requires sacrifice and time and effort and energy and risk at a level that most people simply can't comprehend. They see the Lamborghini driver on the internet, on social media, telling them that this is how he did it, and he did it working 1 hour a day, and they assume, because that guy wants likes and clicks and wants you to buy his program, that that is the reality for the business. Meanwhile, all of us out here who have a lived experience, who have done it over the decades, who have either done it themselves and or, like me, know people who have done it by the hundreds. I've never heard of a story like what you see on the internet. So my warning to that 59% is, it may seem like it can be done. It may seem like there are ways to do it that will free up your time, but the best way to free up your time, the best way to live your life, if you don't want what I just described, if you don't think you can live with what I described, is your 9-to-5 job. And there is nothing wrong with a 9-to-5 job. There's nothing wrong with being a number two in a business. Most people should do that, and they should have pride in that 9-to-5. And again, the people who talk down about 9-to-5 and make people feel like they're fools for 9-to-5, and that 60% of the 59% number that you quoted comes from so much of these guys saying you're a sucker if you're working a 9-to-5. I'm telling you that you're a sucker if you listen to those guys, because you are not a sucker for trying to become an entrepreneur, because it is the hardest thing you will ever do. The smart play is to stay on the 9-to-5, maybe have a little bit of a side hustle. But if you put half as much energy into your 9-to-5 job, I don't work any harder today in any business I have than I did when I was making $3.10 working at McDonald's when I was 16 years old. The amount of effort I put into that McDonald's job is the same amount of effort I put into every single job I ever did. Guess what? Every job I ever had, I got promoted. I got moved up. I went on and got another job once I got the experience. That is because the effort I put in was 100% at everything I did. And if more people in that 9-to-5 took pride in what they were doing, what the value was in that 9-to-5 over and above the monetary reimbursement that they get for it, I think that they would find themselves more content than listening to the people that are just trying to hump you for likes, follows, and to get you to buy their program. So my advice to people is, think about what you're going to do before you're an entrepreneur. And I'll finish with this. Having said all of that, it's my experience that more people than not could become entrepreneurs. I see in people the ability to do things that they don't see in themselves. But I see that because I come from such a brutal background. So I know what people are capable of doing. And I'll go back to the analogy I used earlier, and I use this on entrepreneurs all the time who are struggling, who, Jerry, I don't have it in me. I say, if I put a gun to your mother's head, will you work harder? Will you work longer? Will you go have those uncomfortable conversations? Will you push? Will you sacrifice? Will you risk at a level that you're not doing now if you know that if you haven't gone 100%, I'm going to pull that trigger? The answer is unequivocally, of course you can. And so in that context, more people are capable of becoming entrepreneurs than what I think they think there are, but it comes with caution.
Yeah, and to that point, Jerry, the Washington Post and the Global Monitor also reported that between 15 and 20% of entrepreneurs in America today are either starting or launching a business currently within the next 12 months, my friend. So I want to build on your last answer by asking you about business ambition and what you make of those numbers and what it means to you to truly have business ambition today in America. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
It comes back to, we have to define business, because if you're opening a Shopify store, or you're going to do any of these fad businesses, these things that they call business, if you're doing reselling and reshipping and things of that nature, those aren't businesses, and they have failure rates that are 99%. But if we're going to define them as business, then you're going to get numbers like that many people are going to start businesses. Are we talking about a real business? Because if you're starting a Shopify store, the chances of you having any success in that are almost zero. So whatever you're going to pay to do that, whatever instruction you're going to get to do that, whatever people you bring on to help you build that, you need to look at the realities of those internet jobs, if you will. Yes, there are people who do very well at it, but they are few and far between. Check my math. The failure rates on those businesses are in the high 90%, which dwarfs restaurants, which are terrible investments and are terrible businesses. But are there people in the restaurant business that make money and do very well? Yes, there are. Would I ever tell somebody to go start a restaurant? Never. It is one of the hardest ways to make a living, and it's a surefire way to separate you from your money. But if I'm not mistaken, you are multiples better, have a better chance of having a successful restaurant than you do some of these online businesses. So I'm going to start there. So number one. And number two, to answer your question, I think we go back to the last one. I think, again, there is this idea that entrepreneurship is something that it is not, glorified by what we see on social media that influences so many of those folks. It's so easy to entice somebody into the beauty of being an entrepreneur with you get to be your own boss and you get to make your own hours. And while you're being your own boss and you're making your own hours and you're only working 4 hours a day and you're traveling in the south of France, you're making all of this money while you're doing it, way more than you would ever make by being an employee. And it's just not reality. So I think some of those numbers are people wanting something that is by their definition, based on what they've seen, not what reality is. I would encourage anybody, though, that wants to go and try it, to go and try it, because even when you fail, and the chances are high that you will, you are going to learn more about yourself, about business, about the way the world works, about industry, at a level that it is impossible to do from the outside. You'll never learn it watching videos. You won't learn it at that extreme, reading a book, listening to a seminar, or getting an education in a college. The only way to do it is to go and experience it. And the value in doing it and failing will far outstrip and be far more valuable than anything that you'll do in your private life working a 9 to 5.
Yeah, and Jerry, I want to ask you about leadership development and creating psychologically safe places to do business, and how do you define effective leadership development as it relates to being a great organizational leader or business owner, my friends? So what are your thoughts there?
I think it starts with the leader. It starts with a personality. I've taught my managers for years that a good manager gets people to do for them what they want, but lets them think it's their idea. And that means that I've always been accused of having a big ego, which I do. And I embrace that. I embrace it. I embrace it because I'm also humble. I have a humility because I remember where I come from and I don't forget that. And so in that environment, having a big ego, but being humble, it allows me to give all of the credit to everybody else. I don't care if I'm wrong 100 times a day, as long as what I want is getting done and taking place and we are profitable. That means that if I give somebody an idea and they implement that idea and then that idea comes out and is successful, they take all the credit for it. I'm perfectly fine with that. That doesn't bother me at all, because all I care about is the employee or how the business does. And if that employee has improved the position of the company, i.e. my position. And so this idea that, again, back to television and social media, that these motorcycle shows and these car building shows where the the owners and the are related, and everybody's screaming and yelling, and stuff's getting thrown across the floor, and wrenches are getting tossed, and the camera follows the guy outside, and he slams his door. That's not reality. That's not leadership. That's not businesses. I always use sports to go back to what I know you know about. Sports are not real life. But we have grown up thinking that sports are real life. We think that a good entrepreneur is an aggressive guy that's screaming and yelling, and the coach gets in your face, and the players are on each other, and we're throwing chairs across the basketball floor. And the reality is that there is no place for any of that in business. None. But we think that that's what a good business owner is because of the influence that sports in particular, and how some celebrity entrepreneurs on television, especially in the restaurant space, have. But the reality is 180 degrees the opposite direction, and that is cool, calm, collected, unemotional. There's no emotion in business. You can be emotional about what you're doing, but there's no emotion in business. There's no commiseration in business. There is just work and analytics and numbers. And from a management perspective, you try to treat everybody the same. You give them credit where credit is due. You get them to do for you what you want, but let them think it's their idea. You're going to have the best chance of giving yourself a successful company.
Yeah, and Jerry, I've got 3 questions left for you, and the first of those three questions is this, my friend. I asked you what core questions earlier any entrepreneur should ask themselves before starting a business, but I also wanted to get your perspective on what core questions entrepreneurs should ask themselves if they really want to have a viable conversation about the viability and sustainability of businesses, because I don't need to tell you that most business ventures fail because they don't have a strategic vision. So I guess what I'm asking is, what core questions should entrepreneurs ask when creating the strategic sort of vision for their business, my friend?
The thing that most entrepreneurs starting out is they underappreciate their own abilities. And so that's number one, is how well do you appreciate what you're capable of? What I benefited from is I'm a street kid, like I said. And so I survived some amazing things that helped me as I got older. And I think that, and because of that, I think I'm always going to come out on top. Now, that has been a good thing. It's been a tremendously good thing. It's also been a bad thing, because thinking that way will help you make decisions you should not and ultimately cost you money, to which then I come back around and go, okay, but I'll come out on top eventually of this also. But, I might have extended something out for a few years. The reality is that I think that any entrepreneur looking at becoming an entrepreneur first has to think about themselves and whether or not they're willing to understand what it's going to take to be successful, and are they willing? Is their family willing? Is their wife willing? Or their husband willing? Or the kids willing to go through that journey with them? And if they are, understanding that it's in their hands. There's this idea that it's not working out. I've been trying to be an entrepreneur for years, and I can't get there because the market's too saturated. I can't get any branding. Nobody will listen to me. I can't get any sales calls, all of those things. I'm reminded of my nephew years ago. I saw him do a post right after he graduated from University of Tennessee down here in Tennessee. And he had posted that him and his buddies were going back and forth, and they'd been on 3 or 4 they put in 3 or 4 resumes, and they hadn't got any interview requests. And I quickly called him up, and he was, fresh out of college and 22, 23 years old. And I said, what are you talking about, 3 or 4 jobs? Talk to me when you've done 100 or 500. Then you'll have experience. Then you'll be able to say whether or not what you did is, or what you think is accurate. And so to a potential entrepreneur, understanding that it's so hard to do that you're going to think you're putting in the effort that is required. Many times, though, that's where that self-assessment comes in, so that you can realize that realistically, I could have made 10 more calls today. Realistically, I could have made 1,000 more calls this month. And I think just that before you jump, being fair and honest with yourself as to what it's going to take, and also whether or not you're willing to do that, but also understanding that you're capable of so much more than what you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jerry, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on the role you think government needs to play both on the federal, state, and local levels to spur more opportunities for entrepreneurship for Americans. And what sort of responsibilities do entrepreneurs have to sort of chart their own course? My friend, what do you think the delicate balance between government intervention and businesses and the responsibility of the entrepreneur themselves? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, I think that the government, it is important to remember the government makes nothing. It builds nothing. It creates nothing. The government is a leech. It does nothing but suck. It sucks. I mean that two different ways, I guess. The government sucks, period. But the government also sucks from business owners. Women and men create. We build. We invent. That has very little to do with the government. The government has way too much power. The United States, in particular, the bigger we get, the more money we generate, the more money they take, the more power they get, and they create nothing. There is a reason why 8 out of the 10 states aren't on the Hawaii or the coast of California. They are in and around Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. and in and around those areas create nothing. They add nothing to what all of the rest of us entrepreneurs do. The reality is, for most countries, the United States probably the least, but that isn't a good thing. Canada's terrible. Europe is, it's on the verge of collapse. It is impossible to do anything in these countries relative to entrepreneurialism that doesn't require, back to my 30% the cost of a house, this enormous effort just to do anything. So I think the government has a role, but it is an insignificantly tiny role. Build our roads, make sure our legal system is intact, right? Be pragmatic about all of those things. National defense, and that's it. We don't need hairstylists to have to go get licensed. I know if I got a good haircut or not. And if I don't get a good haircut, I will go somewhere else and get a haircut. I don't need the government to license those people to state, local, county, federal level so that they can cut hair. We have that times a million. There's a huge push here in the United States to deregulate. As a developer and a builder, to anybody listening to this that wants to wonder why the price of houses is so high, very little of the price of a house and the increase in those pricing has to do with the builder, the person who sells it. The vast majority of the cost of a house today and the increases we have seen over the last 10 years is 100% squarely on the back of the government through regulation and overspending on their side and inflation. So I could go on for a whole hour talking about the many, many ways that the government is a leech and a suck and an impediment. Everyone's lives are worse because there is a government, and the government grows bigger and bigger. When I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, I drive on the same roads that I drive on today, but the spending per capita in all of the states down here in the United States, some are worse, some are better, has doubled and tripled in some cases, right? The number of people that have been added is the hundreds of thousands, maybe a few million. But it's the same roads. It's the same infrastructure. The world is in fact dirtier. The United States is dirtier. It's more crime ridden. It's not better. It's worse. But the spending has just continued to be exponential. If we just went back to 2019 levels as an example in the United States, we would balance our budget. That would reinvigorate the United States at a level unimagined just by going back to 2019 pre-COVID levels, but they keep it all. They never give it back. And so I am not one of these, and I'll say one more thing. I am not one of these people that says there should be no government. I'm not an anarchist. There should be government, but it should be a very tiny, insignificant part of our daily lives, as evidenced by we had a federal shutdown here in the United States for about 45 days last year, and nothing happened. Nothing changed. No one's life, other than if you worked in the government and you didn't have to go to work, changed one iota. And that should be a wake-up call to everybody that if the government got out of our way, they are the single largest, like I started off saying when you asked me your first question, the single largest impediment to doing business is city, county, local, state, federal governments, full stop.
Well, to add to your point, just very quickly, regular people have to balance budgets all the time, and the government doesn't do that. And when they don't do that, the ecosystem suffers if you don't know how to manage money. So to add to your point, I'm just wondering, you're clearly very passionate about this. And, if any regular American or any regular person watching this is listening to your passion on this particular subject, what are your thoughts on the need to live a more balanced life when it comes to government, as you said, because everybody else has to budget, and the government doesn't do that. So I'm just wondering your frustration behind that as well, my friend.
Yeah, I think that having grown up the way that I did in the United States, when I was born in 1969, approximately 90% of the world lived in poverty, and now it's about 10%. So the things that business has brought, in spite of what the government has done, is what I just elucidated, which is we have gone from mass poverty to the other side. People today, because of business, because of what they have been able to do, what the inventions that have been made, the poor have things today that only the rich had when I was a kid: multiple cars, multiple televisions, air conditioning, things of that nature, which were largely unheard of only 45, 50 years ago in the United States. For the vast majority of the people, business and entrepreneurs and people willing to risk have gone out there and made that happen in spite of having 30, 40, 50% of their money taken from them by the government. And so I think that to your point, the government should be held to account. They should be forced to live within their means. No government is serious if they're not cutting expenses. No government, my government included, doesn't matter who it is. The United States, the President of the United States, is not serious about any changes if it doesn't involve cutting the size of the government and cutting the amount of money that the government spends. It is an over-bloated bureaucracy that will only get bigger. And if we are interested in long-term health of all of our societies and our civilizations, it has to start with a halving in half the size of all governments. I think that's otherwise it's going to end up like every other experiment along these lines throughout history, in abysmal failure because the government's got too big and too powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jerry, anyone watching this will see that you've got some sports memorabilia behind you, and I know that we're both sports fans. So my final question has to do with legacy, both in life and in business. And what do you think sports can teach us about running a successful business? So how do you want your legacy to be defined both personally and professionally? And what role do you think sports can teach us about being competitive in business, my friend?
Yeah, I'll start with the legacy first. My legacy is based on both professionally and And personally, it's the same thing for me, is how well have I benefited the lives of the people around me, in particular my family. So if I have done that and I have improved their lives, which I have relative to where I come from in particular, then I couldn't be happier, and I will consider that a job well done. I have a son in the military. I have another son going in the military, and I have a daughter. They all live down with me and or around me. I see them constantly. I've been married for coming up on 30 years. I have hit the jackpot relative to life. And my grandchildren are going to know that, you know what, Grandpa was a badass and he got things done. And I'm going to continue to push that process with them and with my children the way that I always have. So that's my legacy. My legacy is my family. They are intact. They are happy. They are doing well. They are prospering. And for me, that is why I go out of the cave every morning and go hunt down a Tyrannosaurus Rex and hit it over the head and drag it back to the cave for them, regardless of what that happens to my well-being or my mental state or my health, because that is the only thing that drives me, is taking care of my children and my family. That is my passion. And so that's my legacy. In terms of sports, we talked about the impact sports has negatively, I think, on the culture at large relative to entrepreneurship. There is no connection between those overexcited, confrontational events that we see in sports all of the time. That does not translate to the real world. What does translate to the real world, though, is heart. So heart and the understanding that your brain will give out far before your body will in the fitness industry and in sports, bringing that into the entrepreneurial space and understanding that your brain, your willpower, you will break before your brain and your body does. You will convince yourself this can't be done well before that's a reality. And I think that sports, and we'll say more fitness more specifically, but the ability to push back and push through the slings and the arrows and the pain points that you will go through physically in sports and mentally in entrepreneurship, and physically in entrepreneurship, actually, because you got to work 15, 18-hour days, that you are capable of so much more. Sports does a really good job of showing us those people. Michael Jordan had a motor in him unlike anyone else, and his will to win was indomitable. And Wayne Gretzky, the same way. And there's, throughout history, there's been multiple people just like that. And I think entrepreneurs can learn from that, in that they will want to give up far before they should. Their brain will start to tell them that they can't get something done when somebody with more experience that maybe has already been through the battle can help them out with and guide them and lead them to capabilities that they couldn't imagine even a few months before. Mike Tyson had a great quote. He said, "Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. But the reality is, okay, Mike, now tell me what to do after I get punched in the face. I get that I'm going to get punched. Tell me what to do afterwards."
Considering the fact that Brazie has been married now for over 3 decades, before we bid our conversation adieu, I was interested to ask him what's the secret to having a successful work-life balance after 30 years in entrepreneurship, considering the facts. Fortune magazine says that upwards of 30% of entrepreneurs struggle to maintain a quality marriage because they're committing so much of themselves to their business that they often forget entirely about the impact on their partner. Here's what Brazie had to say about maintaining a positive and healthy relationship. What do you think?
Yeah, simple. I was either at work or at home. And so my wife understood that work and what needed to be done at work was what paid the bills and what was important. And she supported me in that environment 100%. She was able to do that, though, because there was nothing in the middle. I didn't stop at the bar. If I was going to play softball with the team or something, my family would come out. Everything I did, 95% of the time, away from work, involved my family. So there was no in between. We get this idea that we're going to go do X, Y, or Z while the wife is at home and the kids are in school and all of that. And the reality is you go to work and you go home. And I never needed anything else. Doesn't mean I didn't go doing other things, and I absolutely do. And now as my kids are older now, I go play pool 4 or 5 nights a week. I love to go play pool. But when I had children, when they were little, it was work and it was home, and it worked. And my wife supported me in all of that. I never had to take care of anything at the house because she took care of all of that. I took care of everything in the business, and that was my job. And then we met in the middle, understanding that we were supporting each other towards this common goal. So communication doesn't mean that there aren't fights, doesn't mean there aren't disagreements, but you communicate through it, and ultimately it gets easier as time goes by, no matter how hard it was. And the other thing too, as a man, my job is to take the slings and arrows. My job is to deal with the pain points. It's not hers. So I don't bring that home. So I'm not one of these guys that says you go home and you got to cry and whine to your wife. No, I'm one of these guys that say my job is to suffer for my family. My job is to sacrifice and to risk for my family. And I am the man that I am because I do that. It's not an imposition on me. It's not a safe space I need to go find. It's not a self-help me time thing that I need. My purpose, men's purpose in life. We are put on this planet to sacrifice for our families. It is what we are meant to do, and I relish the ability to do that. I was able to do it successfully, and my marriage worked out as well as it has for all these years because I don't cry or whine or complain to her. I don't bring the stuff home from work. I don't take it out on her. None of it is her fault or the children's fault, because my job, again, is to hit that pterodactyl over the head and drag it back to the cave so my family can eat, irrespective of what impact that might have on me emotionally or physically.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Jerry, tell me if people want to get connected with the Kronos Group or yourself personally and all the stuff you've got going on. What's the best way they can do that?
Yep, the Kronos Group, Kronos, thekronosgroup.org. Go there. If you are an entrepreneur, or you're looking at the business from the outside and you're thinking about it, or you just got a question about your career, go to thekronosgroup.org. There is a link there that you can have a meeting with me, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's free. I'm not charging anything. If you're an entrepreneur, I want to talk to you about a peer-to-peer group, I've got one. If not, you should go get one, and I will help counsel you through that to the best that I can, give you whatever advice I can. But to anybody that's even interested, reach out to me, schedule, and let's have a conversation. This isn't me trying to sell anything. I'm not. If you don't own a business doing 7 to 8 figures, I have nothing to sell you except I have advice, and I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Thekronosgroup.org. Reach out. Let's have a conversation.
Well, pardon the pun for this podcast, but I appreciate the work that you do in the world and business, my friend, and I want to thank you for all of the avenues that you've created for business diversification, inclusion in business, and all the rest. My friend, I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this afternoon and for being here. It's most appreciated.
Absolutely, Kevin. Fantastic podcast, man. I appreciate you having me on. Really great conversation.